There is a UAP reverse engineering program in America, in Russia, and in China, because I'm basically exposing all of them. What happened, though, was that he created something, what is known as the death ray. It was about stopping anything that is in motion, tanks, airplanes, trains.
Wow.
The mechanics of it could be stopped with the pressing of a button. And that the Pope himself had to intervene, begging him not to give it to Mussolini because it would have changed the course of the war.
You've been talking about the Pope getting directly involved. And I know that you know about an incident where aliens visited the Pope.
You actually have a being that landed in the Castel Gandolfo gardens. 20 minutes of conversation between the Pope and an extraterrestrial being, allegedly a Nordic. What we have seen in my book is that the Catholic world is in control of everything.
Welcome back to Far Out with Faust, everybody. Today we are pulling back the curtain on the deepest held secrets of the Vatican and its relationship with the military-industrial complex. And we're doing it with my return guest, the former Freemason and best-selling author, Leo Zagami. In this explosive episode, Leo reveals the receipts on the UFO reverse engineering program, also known as the Legacy program, that began 14 years before Roswell under the fascist regime of none other than Mussolini. We dive straight into the Vatican's 53-mile-long secret archive of extraterrestrial encounters, the theological battles over the Book of Enoch, and the dark occult roots of the American secret space program. Finally, Leo discloses how the modern UFO disclosure campaign is actually a Trojan horse, something I've also been saying for quite so many years. It is, quite obviously, a highly controlled psyop engineered by the Parasite class to lock humanity into an AI-controlled surveillance grid. Fear, fear, fear. No one I know has quite the access that Leo has to the Vatican, to intelligence sources in it, and no one does their homework quite like Leo. So this is going to be an awesome episode. Strap in, keep your minds and hearts open, and welcome Leo back to the show. Leo, you're becoming a regular on my show, and I have to say, it's exciting. It's great to have you back. Thank you for taking some time to beam back in with me.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, and especially when I have a book like this one, which has just reached the top of the UFO bestseller Amazon.
Nice.
It's been one of the hottest books in this category, and of course, it's been the last 6 months of my work dedicated to combine the publication of this book with the release of Steven Spielberg Disclosure Day, creating an antidote for those people who might be disturbed by the creation. Though I find it a little bit far-fetched for me, but I know that there's a lot of fragile minds out there. And there is, though, some elements that need to be, of course, discussed in relation to what Spielberg is doing. That's why I inserted them in my book. I had the possibility, and don't ask me now, to have a preview of the screenplay, which, by the way, it's written by an ultra-Catholic like David Coep, or somebody who is very close to the Jesuits. And so we have, on one side, Steven Spielberg, the producer of this script, which is himself a Sabbatean Frank, is connected to the Chabad Lubavitch movement, to Les Wexner mega group, something that, as you know, we discussed when I presented the last time the Rise and Fall of Frankie's Monster. Well, this important development in my research is also due to the fact that for many years I have followed ufology, thanks also to my connections to the Centro Ufologico Italiano, De Kuhn and Roberto Pinotti, who I've dedicated this book to, who is my mentor in this sector. And Roberto Pinotti is renewed worldwide for having been also, by the way, in the year 2000, the guy who brought out the documentation regarding Mussolini's UFO, as
that's right.
Call it.
That's right. Some of us who had read about that had been talking about that and saying, listen, the Italian government has documentation. And then finally it came out and we were like, see, and of course they were like, it's fake.
No, what happens in my book, I actually explain how these documents came to light, thanks to the grandson of Benito Mussolini, Fabrizio Ciano, third Count of Cortelanzo and Buccheri, whose father, who was the son-in-law of Benito Mussolini, was killed because he betrayed the Duce. Now, towards the end of his life, in an anonymous way, he started to send out these documents, and I explain in this book how he did that. Of course, he didn't want his name to be known while he was alive, but now no longer alive, we are allowed. And there was a confirmation, by the way, of the whole documentation from his family, which is also linked carefully amongst the sources that I include in this book, because Roberto Pinotti and Alfredo Lissoni wrote a book after, published a book about this, and we are talking about 23 years before David Grusch came out with
David Grusch,
David Grusch, a Catholic himself, I will not say a disinfo agent, is a gatekeeper. Now, in my book, I describe the figures of the gatekeepers as, of course, being figures of the system. Now, they can be, of course, themselves good or bad gatekeepers, but in general, if you are in that position, it's because you are authorized. So it's not, only a form of criticism from my side to call them gatekeepers. It's simply stating the obvious.
And I think David Grusch, when he came out, he was told what he was allowed to talk about and what he wasn't.
To this day, he is working with classified material, and every time he is releasing something, he states that he's been authorized to do so.
That's right.
So it's not like it's a mistake,
Not quite an actual whistleblower, right?
He's an authorized gatekeeper. That's what he is. And I think that is the best term. Like Steven Spielberg is an authorized gatekeeper. Now, he might go on record stating the contrary, but everybody from ufologic movement, the ufology milieu has even recently stated that's not the case. Even on Jesse Michaels, they went on and stated that he worked with naval intelligence.
Of course he did.
It's absolutely not a secret. He continues, though, to lie. That is sincerely something a bit disappointing. A guy who has reached the end of his life and should be at least a little bit more honest. But that's what he wants to do, to be a gatekeeper until the end. And so in my book, I've described why we have that kind of narrative in his film, starting from Encounters of the Third Kind.
E.T. was probably the most docile of the films that, of course, some of us who have researched this know that he got that information, also from intelligence agencies about, E.T. obviously.
All his information has come from very privileged sources. And I remember in my book, I actually also come up with this whole episode of him presenting E.T. at Ronald Reagan's White House, and Ronald Reagan saying in front of everybody, there is people in this room knowing that this is the truth. Now, I also, as you know, have a privileged way of touching on this subject because of my Masonic past, because of my past in certain secret societies. And I never hide that. I've never been hiding that from you or from anybody else. I'm not a gatekeeper. I'm simply somebody who had the possibility in the past. And of course, thanks to my connection still to the present day, for example, Roberto Pinotti is a Freemason. Now, I explain what kind of Freemason he is, though, in my book. A Freemason who has never really encouraged the New World Order, who has been highly critical, and for that reason he has moved from more, let's say, mainstream obedience to a more underground, irregular, between brackets, Masonic obedience. I also talk about the involvement of the P2 Lodge. I was involved with the Monte Carlo Lodge, founded by the P2, and all those figures that were connected to Licio Gelli, including Gianmario Ferramonti, who then was connected to Zecharia Sitchin and Monsignor Corrado Quattrucci. People don't know know that, but Monsignor Corrado Balducci, the late Monsignor Corrado Balducci, is no longer with us. He was very outspoken, you remember, at the time about extraterrestrials. In his book dedicated to demonic possession, he had a preface made by a known Freemason, Emilio Servadio, who was one of the founders of the Italian psychoanalysts, and also, of course, connected to not only Freud, but also the paranormal, because he was also in that kind of situation whereby he was trying to still elaborate what we have in the paranormal as something that was deemed good for scientific research, and something that we should pursue, which is good, I think, to actually not treat paranormal as hocus pocus, but to have...
I agree. The more scientific we can approach it, the more we can parcel out the fear.
Understood that. In fact,
what's amazing is the Vatican has, of every instituted and centralized religion, the Vatican is really, as far as my knowledge, the only one that has come out and made statements and formed a council and they have an observer. They've made statements about extraterrestrial beings, but most Christians and Catholics are either unaware or they just don't.
Well, I will say this now. My book explains from the very start. I don't know if you had the possibility of going through my book already or not.
Just a little bit. I got it just a few days ago, and I was able to check out a little bit of it.
So it's a book of 450 pages, so I understand it's not a simple book to go through, but it's a book I highly recommend you to read, because I'm sure that in the future you will probably like to touch upon certain parts we might have missed today. Now, in regards to the first chapter of my book, I focus on the different theological approaches from the Catholic Church. Within the Catholic Church, we have two different realities at the moment. The majority of the Catholic Church embraces the Second Vatican Council, and so embraces a more progressive view, but at the same time embraces also what the Catholic Church narrative has been pushing since the Second Vatican Council in regards to the extraterrestrial, embracing the brother extraterrestrial. Then you have the traditional
embracing the brother extraterrestrial. Is that right? Is that what you said?
Yes, that's
okay.
That's absolutely what they actually.
I know.
That's what they actually wrote on one of the on the official newspaper of the Vatican. It's like something that they are openly embracing, because they're not hiding that part of their nature.
Most people don't know that.
But that's why, you see, when this is the official newspaper of the Vatican, l'extraterrestre è mio fratello, the extraterrestrial is my brother.
Wow, that is, look at that.
Actually, it's actually very, but the story that brings them to that realization is what makes my book really super special, especially because in the English language, we never really had this analysis about the Vatican relation with the alien agenda, or the P, or the whatever you want to call it today. It used to be called UFOs. I still prefer to call them UFOs, but the extraterrestrial, or extra-dimensional, or interdimensional, because then you have all these varieties also that we have to distinguish. Also, in relation to the theological approach of the various Christian denominations. In fact, like I said, my first distinguishes between the various Christian denominations, not only the Catholic, so mainly the Catholic progressive post-conciliar, then the Catholic traditionalists, the ones who maybe favor the Latin Mass, who don't really recognize so much the relevance of the Second Vatican Council. At times this created a schism, like in the case of Monsignor L.U.C.I.F.E.R, as you know, and there is still an ongoing discussion with that part of the church. So they seem to have a closer idea, let's say, take on this topic that the Orthodox have. The Orthodox, though, have also two slightly different takes. Like the Orthodox Russians have one take, the Orthodox Americans have another take. And then you have the evangelicals, and then you have certain evangelicals that, of course, don't agree with the rest of the evangelicals, like for Timothy Alberino, who doesn't agree with mainstream evangelicals. So you have so many different takes on this whole question, and how they gonna react? that was a very important element in my book. And that's why at the end of the book, on the fourth chapter, not the fifth chapter, which is something totally that picks up from there, but goes also into a direction that I'm not going to disclose completely because I will really spoil the end of the book.
No, I understand.
But in the fourth chapter, I touch on the various, on the two surveys that were conducted in America towards the reaction of the various Christian denominations, religious denominations, towards a disclosure day. So all this has been studied very much in a scientific way.
Right.
Spielberg knows that very well, he has built up in his movie something directly connected to a Jesuit narrative, visibly connected, because you have a former nun as a protagonist, you have a nun in the monastery as also the co-protagonist that then embrace somehow this extraterrestrial disclosure. I think that it's also important to understand, though, that Spielberg is also giving us some elements of truth, like
that's
like
why I'm excited to see it.
The element of truth that I think is most relevant is the reverse engineering, which is acknowledged, and it's of course also part of my book because it's from that very first UFO accident in northern Italy between Magenta and Bergiate. That then the whole reverse engineering pops up and is elaborated further on. The craft is given thanks to the Vatican to the Americans. The Americans then have the whole New Mexico accidents. That is not only Roswell, but a series of accidents then drives this reverse engineering.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, I mean, here in America, when we hear about UFO crashes, everyone always thinks...
I have some problems in hearing your audio.
Okay, hold on one second. Let me see.
No, maybe you had some. Yes, now it's clear. It's clear.
Okay, now it's better now. Okay, people always think about Roswell when you hear about UFO crashes, but 6 years before that, as we've been talking about Italy. What happened?
14 years.
14 years before that. That's right. It was. So, can you break down what happened in the town of Magenta, and what did the Vatican have to do with it?
Okay, so in the town of Magenta, between Magenta and Bergiate, in reality. So you are, it's not like it crashed in the middle of a town, because then it would be really difficult, I guess, even for the fascists to maintain the top secrecy on the whole thing. However, like I explained in my book, showing also the documents, Mussolini, the documents that were provided by his grandson to Roberto Pinotti and Alfredo Lissoni, documents like this one. And these are official documents that were then forensically analyzed by a forensic analyst who is this one in the center between Roberto Pinotti and Alfredo Lissoni. And this guy is basically Dr. Antonio Garavaglia, who is no longer with us, unfortunately, but used to be a forensic expert back in the day. So, it's not like Pinotti or Lissoni, after receiving these documents, simply published the book without having ulterior evidence. They actually wanted absolutely to have certainty. Let me pick up the glasses so I have, because
no, I understand. Mine are right here just in case.
So Antonio Garavaglia is a very interesting subject for himself. I'll tell you why. Because I discovered during the study or the research for this book that there were a few synchronicities that. Sorry, my glasses are all over the place. I discovered certain synchronicities, which I then made Roberto Pinotti acquainted with, and Pinotti acknowledged these synchronicities were quite relevant. One synchronicity. Magenta. Magenta is not only the name of a town, it happens to be also the surname of the first organizer of a UFO conference in 2002 inside the Vatican.
Wow.
Okay. Then Magenta, so that is one synchronicity. In Vergiate, which is the other town nearby the accident, the town doctor was called like the forensic analyst that, but they're not the same person. And when the town doctor died, they died more or less at the same time, the town doctor and this guy who did the forensic analysis, they dedicated a square to him. It had nothing to do with the forensic analyst, though. Imagine the synchronicity of events at work. Magenta happens to be a place where there was a bloody war, but it's also a place which gave the name to a specific color.
Yes.
So there is a series of synchronicities when you go and research certain subjects within ufology. Now, there is those researchers who say, don't give too much importance or relevance to synchronicity, but synchronicity was something that
makes me think of Magic 12,
Majestic 12.
Majestic 12, right?
Yeah. It makes us think of the fact that it was Carl Gustav Jung who actually gave such importance and really used the name synchronicity and coined it in the academic work as subject of relevance. In the late part of his life, as we know, he was also obsessed with UFOs. Now, he wrote a book about it, but he also wrote other material where he had a more favorable approach. So people tend to say about Carl Gustav Jung, no, he didn't believe in UFOs because he wrote this book and it's basically about the archetypes and this and that.
Right.
Instead, in reality, there is other documents which I cite in my book which confirm that he was actually quite adamant in the realization that these UFOs could be a reality, of course, that I'm sure has manifested at the end of his life in a very strong way, so it drew all his attention. Let's remember that at the end of the 50s, beginning of the 60s, the UFO phenomenon was starting to really
and the abduction phenomenon had begun, and it got hot.
But going back to the Vatican involvement,
how does the Vatican come into play?
So the Vatican comes into play, first of all, because when Mussolini recovers all this material from the UFO crash, and then it was brought to a place called Monte Sorrate, so a secret location, a little bit like Cheyenne Mountain here in the United States. No? He brings this material there, and at that point, he... initially, he doesn't know what to do, so he immediately has to call some scientists that are reliable, that are trustworthy. And he creates what is going to be known as Cabinet RS-33. Now, a lot of people thought that RS-33 was because of 1933, or even connection with, initially even myself thought, 33, it's also a degree within Freemason. Who knows? It's a synchronicity at work there, no? So, but then we discover something else. Thanks to Roberto Pinotti, he tells me, no, Leo, this is the archive section that the fascists created in the archives in Milan for reverse engineering.
Oh.
So the actual reference is to the reverse engineering section. It's nothing to do with the year. I was actually quite impressed by that. I was quite impressed. I thought it was an interesting connection, not to say the least. Then you had, of course, the problem that once you reverse engineer, the Germans were, of course, interested. That's right. Himmler came immediately knocking at the door with his SS and wanted to know more. I mean, we know that Hitler was giving Himmler the possibility to do all kinds of things with
trying,
with the Anerbe and everything to search ancient artifacts, to actually study this or study that. Well, what happened was that Hitler and Mussolini met up regarding this, and they discussed it, but at that point, the matter was in the hands of the scientists who could do some reverse engineering. But I mean, we're talking about 1933 to
1933. That is so far, further back than most people think the reverse engineering began, I think.
No,
safe to say.
But I mean, for Hitler and Mussolini, initially it was about reverse engineering Soviet or American material. They
Right.
didn't really, initially build this reverse engineering section for UFO activities or UFO.
They built it hoping to get their hands
Reading
on.
UFOs. I mean, that was
Right.
retrieving technology that in general they deemed could have been reverse engineered. So
Right. Okay.
when the actual crash happened, though, they noticed that there were some beings on board. And apparently they were Nordics, though, I mean, we don't have absolute certainty about this. We don't really even know if it crashed, it landed, if
Right.
it was, I mean, there is always this kind of little uncertainties along the way when it comes to the final narrative of these things. But one thing is for sure, that Guglielmo Marconi, who, of course, was the most known scientist in Italy. He had invented the radio. So, I mean,
wow.
He's the inventor of the radio still to this day. You have Edison, the inventor of the light bulb, and Marconi, the inventor of the radio. So, the Cabinet 33 was a product at that point of Guglielmo Marconi. Guglielmo Marconi, though, was also very much a scientist.
Yeah.
All this, though, was also confirmed later on by the daughter of Guglielmo Marconi, I think it's called Degna Paresce, who is the firstborn of Guglielmo Marconi, and also his son. So, I mean, this is not like stuff that has been just confirmed by one source and
right. No.
others. It's like kind of like so. Marconi moved and then to an approach which was to reverse engineer whatever he could, but I guess he had a lot of difficulty in reverse engineering a technology which was millions of years ahead. What happened, though, was that he created something. Now, we don't know if it was a direct result of the reverse engineering, but we know that he created what is known as the death ray. And that the Pope himself had to intervene, begging him not to give it to Mussolini because it would have changed the course of the war. It was a very simple kind of a Tesla piece of technology, if we want to put it. It was about stopping anything that is in motion, tanks, airplanes, trains. The mechanics of it could be stopped with the pressing of a button. That, of course, would have created a complete change in the results of the war.
Right.
So
the Vatican, though,
the Vatican knew and wanted to intervene in favor of the Allies because they didn't like this technology to eventually benefit Hitler or Mussolini. That was
I see.
So when David Grusch, or Grusch as I call it, more in a European way, David Grusch came out with this thing in 2023. It wasn't a novelty, of course, for Pinotti, who had even published a book 23 years before about it. So, I mean, it was really not a novelty. But at that point, Grusch gave some small details that were not given by the son of Galeazzo Ciano.
David Grusch, the recent whistleblower. Yeah.
Yes, he gave some small details that make Pinotti and Lissoni understand that he was not only genuine, but that the Americans had also other details about this whole accident. So what happened was that the Kuhn, which helped me in the research of this book, made a research in the historic archives of Milan, Varese, and Bergamo, where all the material apparently, officially, all the material regarding this topic had been destroyed. However, some of this material was eventually kept, like I said, from the grandson of Mussolini, which makes it then resurface. The whole thing resurfaces. Now, I was in the Air Force.
No, of course, but
I was.
But I think it's
no. I just want to tell you, I was in the Air Force.
So you were in the Air Force. I thought you said I wasn't there.
No, I was in the Air Force myself.
Right. Oh, okay.
I was a member. I was actually working in the Ministry of Defense for the Air Force. So I actually approached also certain things with my own knowledge of having, served in the Air Force and everything else. Now, apparently, the cabinet RS-33, at one point, the secret team transited through Guidonia. Guidonia is an Air Force base, which I'm very acquainted to also because it's close to the house of my mother. So, and I never really served in Guidonia. Like I said, I served in the Ministry of Defense in their headquarters in Rome. And at times I, of course, went to the various airports. But I was only for a year for my duty as an Italian citizen. At the time, we were obliged. So it wasn't like I was eager to become an Air Force member. But my father, when I left, when I started to complain about my time at school, and when I wanted to work, and I didn't like the politics that I saw, because the school where I was going was kind of catto-communist in their approach to Jesuit. It was something that was making me sick. And so I said to my father, I'm going to leave. And he said, okay, I'm going to call my friend the general, and you're going to go to the Air Force now.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, fine. And so I was recruited immediately, and then sent to a special unit for 2 months to train in a specific airport in Viterbo, which gave me the military training, like, shooting bombs. But then after, I was taken out of that to be sent in an office. So not to serve necessarily guarding a 30 or 50 million, 100, 200 million plane, because that is what you do in those kinds of special units. However, the work that I did will eventually connect with Operation Gladio. We connect with
Operation Gladio, you said, right?
At the end of Operation Gladio, I was recruited to participate to one of their last missions.
Wow.
Which then gave me the possibility to, fortunately, get out of the military, say, a couple of months earlier. And I was, in the sense that I was officially in the base, but I wasn't. I was in what they call a ghost at that point. But
I see.
But I did an operation which was quite rather scary. So, I mean, it was an experience I didn't really enjoy it. I mean, going into the house of intelligence operative from former Yugoslavia with a microfilm and a guy. Yeah, I mean, and breaking into the house and finding a dog inside the house to actually do all it. It wasn't really like your average military thing. It's like off the books, and then you get caught, you get arrested, So
Leo, I want to
in court martials would have been even worse. But in regards to Mussolini and what happened was that Mussolini and Guglielmo Marconi, of course, Mussolini was somebody who wanted absolute obedience, the Duce, So he intimated all journalists to silence upon this topic. However, other documents which I also published in my book shows that then UFOs started to surface, like, they were looking for this UFO. Other UFOs were looking for the UFOs that were suddenly missing. So suddenly you have between 1933 and 1936 series of UFOs that appear between Milan and Venice, and at one point in the summer of 36 they are all over the place in Venice. And when they start to appear, at that point the whole topic had to be discussed also at the governmental level. And for that reason, in my book, I show even a document in which, an official document in which a member of government is drawing a UFO to his colleague, and it's an official paper.
So, Leo, I want to just sum up for my listeners. Magenta. Well, we know it wasn't we know there's a lot more to that name now, but. How would you finish this sentence? Magenta wasn't just an early crash story. It was the moment.
Magenta was
the Vatican. What?
Okay, no, let me explain. Magenta is, you see, aliens, different species of aliens, or whatever you want to call them, UAPs and UFOs have been with us forever. They're always been here. But that signs really the moment in which they start the legacy program. That is the moment of reverse engineering. That's the birth of the reverse engineering. And that reverse engineering could have benefit the Nazi fascists, and we would have found ourselves in a very different world. But because of the intervention of Pope Pius XII, with Marconi, begging him not to do that, then the whole thing was actually in favor of the Americans that retrieved the UFO here in America, in New Mexico, as well as also they didn't only get that, they get also some scientists to work with the Manhattan Project.
That's right.
Also a very important element in our story, because then you see the actual birth of this reverse engineering is divided between the Department of Energy, EA, and the Air Force, and the US Air. So and then of course the defense contractors. Like today you have, for example, you have Peter Thiel, who is himself a defense contractor, who is afraid of full disclosure, because of course he knows that they have to prepare for something like that. And in fact, you see, as they're preparing for disclosure, they are also preparing to monitor and control all of us.
Of course.
They don't want to lose control of it's a little bit like you have a horse, okay, and you have a carrot, okay, to give to the horse.
Right.
But this carrot will be given to the horse only after you have full control of the horse.
Right. That's what they want.
They don't want the horse to simply go and eat the carrot. They want the horse to be, completely under their control.
Absolutely.
AI cameras, face recognition.
Hence Peter Thiel and Planeteer. Yeah.
Okay. And his secret society, which is also part of the problem, because dialogue with secret society is also part of the problem.
Indeed.
So here we have a situation whereby the Vatican has led from the very beginning this whole operation. And why I'm saying that? Because soon after, when the Roswell accident happened, and also other accidents happened, the Vatican immediately intervened by sending their representatives to every event. I mean, people don't know that, but the Vatican, when it came down to Roswell, they immediately sent James Francis Cardinal McIntyre from Los Angeles. And then, so they were the first ones to actually have some knowledge about what was happening, aside from, of course, the so-called deep state and the people with very high security clearance that at the time are much higher than the president, because the president, every other politician, so like we know, and like even Steven Spielberg implies in his movie, or even Marco Rubio implies in the Age of Disclosure documentary, are on a need-to-know basis. So they know basically very little. The Vatican knows everything instead. The Vatican knows what has happened in the last 2,000 years connected to these entities, to these UFOs, to these UAPs, to whatever you want to call them, because then you have, of course, various races, various realities. But the Vatican knows it, and the Vatican has the archives. The archives that are a major attraction from all over the universe. If you are from another part of the universe, you don't want to come here and discuss anything with a bunch of ignoramus, but you definitely to go and check what there is in 53 miles of hidden archives under the Vatican.
53 miles?
That is only the archives. Secret. Oh my God. You have the libraries another 23 miles. So you're talking about vast amount of knowledge, which the Vatican sits on, and doesn't let anybody accede. I mean, very few academics have the opportunity to go there. You have to, first of all, be somebody involved in religious studies. You can't be simply a scientist. You have a lot of requirements to accede, especially...
Is the Pope allowed?
The Pope, of course, is his archives. So he knows he can do whatever he wants. That is, the archives is basically you find all the correspondence in the last couple of thousand years with all the major heads of state, the Vatican, the popes, the directions of the Pope. But then you have another element, which is of interest, that the scientists, especially the ones from the legacy program, are starting to go aggressively and want to have access to. Because the sanctification of certain people, this process whereby you make somebody a beato and then a saint, is always evaluated with their miracles, so their
Right.
paranormal
And
events.
you need to qualify for them. Yeah.
And all those paranormal events often qualify as UAP events
Mm-hmm.
or paranormal events. So the Vatican has always been there and has the most vast archive in the whole world. At the same time, like, I wrote a book about the Jesuits. This was the last book of the Confession series.
Mm-hmm.
They are the astronomers of the Vatican.
That's
And
right.
they are the ones that, like I explain in my book, built the first observatory in Rome with their Collegium Romanum. So with their first college in Rome, they built the observatory. And then they also went to China and exchanged knowledge on astronomy with the Chinese. If it wasn't for the Jesuits, the Chinese would not have a space program.
Wow.
The thing that then I explain in my book is that the Vatican created the faculty of paranormology, which is never discussed by anybody, but it was created by Father Andreas Resch. Father Andreas Resch was a guy who then will found. He was from the north of Italy, part which I like very much. It's actually, they talk German, they don't even talk Italian. It's
really? Wow.
With Austria, sorry. It's
Right.
on the border with Austria, and it's called Trentino Alto Adige. And in the part which is more German, literally, they don't talk Italian. It's quite shocking for an Italian.
Wow.
In a part of Italy where they hardly talk Italian, or when you talk Italian, they watch you like.
Yeah.
But Resch was that guy. And lately we have a tennis player who comes from that part of Italy, who is actually a worldwide champion, Sinner.
Okay.
He's from actually that part of Italy. So they look also rather Nordic. Now, Father Andreas Resch ends up building a paranormal institute in Innsbruck in Austria at the end of his life. But before that, he becomes the head of the Faculty of Paranormology in one of the most important and prestigious universities in Rome.
Wow.
And he's the one who educates then the priest for the encounter with the extraterrestrials.
Wow.
But he is also the one who, through Uri Geller, who already was working with Al Puthoff, because Al Puthoff and Father Andreas Resch both work for the Society for Scientific Exploration,
Right.
which is another organization very close to the CIA. In my book, I explain how there is all these connections also with remote viewing. Remote viewing
Right.
is also an element of great importance in connecting
Yes.
these beings and then eventually being able to access to their technology.
So it's fun. It's amazing because if you fast forward just a couple decades after this crash, we see this massive escalation in contact, right? And then, you've been talking about the Pope getting directly involved. And I know that you know about an incident where aliens visited the Pope. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that was the following Pope, because then you have Pius XII, who never really encountered directly an alien, but like I explained in my book, in the early 50s, has an encounter of the second kind. That kind of like, those, because you have encounter of the first kind, second kind,
Right.
third kind, going by J.L. and Enoch categorization, which is very helpful, I think.
Yes.
In any case, the first kind is almost irrelevant because it doesn't leave any traces in the atmosphere or anything. But in the case of the Vatican Gardens, where this happened with Pius XII, he was so moved by it that he then will write a note, which will be published many years later, a note which I published in my book.
Wow. You wrote a note about it.
His experience with this, what he accumulated that experience to the miracle in Fatima. But it wasn't yet an encounter of the third kind. That will happen with his successor, which is, of course, John the 23rd in 1961.
And the third kind is when you
actually have a being that landed in front of in the Vatican, in the Castel Gandolfo Gardens.
It's like a direct encounter. Sometimes people are
20 minutes
taken.
Of conversation, 20 minutes of conversation between the Pope and an extraterrestrial being.
Wow.
Allegedly a Nordic, but we don't, we will always have to be very careful with definition.
Yeah, even if.
Anyway, what we have seen in my book is that the Catholic world is in control of everything, because Alputov is a Jesuit agent in control, and he was the guy who started the whole Stargate initiative, which was initially, of course, a remote viewing, not a data center initiative. But now that is the ultimate development of this current alien invasion, because reverse engineering has brought us the technology that we are using, and it's, like I stress in my book, the Trojan horse that that is building this prison around us, this digital.
It was Pope Pius II. You said he had more of a
Pope Pius the 12th.
The 12th. He had more of a close encounter of the second kind.
Yes, that was in the gardens of the Vatican. While
in the gardens of the Vatican,
the actual.
And he wrote a note about it that is actually.
Yes.
Is it public, or did you have to dig it up, or?
No, it was made public not so long ago by a very important journalist who then ended up working with the Vatican. So he's very much close to the Vatican, Andrea Tornielli. I show here brief. You can see.
And what the note speaks about almost like.
Here, do you want to show it?
Yeah.
This one. Okay, this is the article about his encounter of the second kind that was published by an Italian magazine back then. You see?
Oh my God, that's.
And then you have the actual note, which was published more recently, because the family didn't really give the possibility to access this note. And it's the Pacelli family, it's from the Pacelli family archive, detailing his personal with what he deemed the miracle of the sun. Because then it was two suns, you know, I mean, the UFO becomes like a second kind of sun. He accommodated this miracle to Fatima. And then that is the other thing. In the last chapter of my book, I focus a lot also on the Blessed Virgin Mary apparitions, because they are very much in line with the UFO phenomenon.
Right. So by this point, the Vatican wasn't just investigating the phenomenon; they were actually experiencing it, and they
were experiencing it. And once it actually, you know, I mean, imagine this: this whole thing happened. In a succession that then in the end inspired the Pope, like John the 23rd, to put together the turning point for the Vatican and for the Catholic Church event, which was the Second Vatican
Council.
And he was a Freemason, but he was also a Rosicrucian, and he had his first contact experience actually not by meeting the extraterrestrial directly, but by channeling in a Masonic lodge in Istanbul a few years before, when he wasn't the Pope.
Wow.
So all this experience, of course, is related in my book. You see, this kind of material has never been published in the English language. While instead in Italy, there has been books by my colleague Roberto Pinotti or Alfredo Lissoni. Thanks to Alfredo Lissoni, I had also access to the Vatican archives, because he was a professor of religion who had the possibility to access the archives. So I was able to retrieve some information from him also, which was very interesting. Aside from Pinotti, who filled me up with a lot of stuff, I could have actually written probably 10 books, but I had to, summarize everything. Now, Pinotti last year was invited by the Soul Foundation. Now, people think, what is the Soul Foundation? You know what is the Soul Foundation?
What is it?
What is it? You see? Go and check it out. Put Google. Go and check it out live now while I'm doing it.
What's it called again?
The SOL Foundation.
The SOL.
Because they are the biggest project that currently the CIA has put together for disclosure. Nobody knows much about it.
Oh, the SOL Foundation.
Pete Scaffish, the guy who is in charge of it, Gary Nolan, I don't know if you ever heard of him. Of course. Well, these are the people who are in charge of it. So imagine what kind of people there is in this.
Wow. That's crazy. It's right there. It is right there. That's amazing.
Yeah. Okay. So you see, my book is based not on conspiracy theories, but it's based on facts. And I that's why this book is becoming popular. Not because I'm going to make any friends through writing this book, especially, you can forget Leo Zagami being invited to a conference in the desert or any other UFO conference, because I'm basically exposing all of them as a fraud and as a tool for the Vatican. Because this year we end up with Daniel Sheehan confirming all that, saying the Pope has invited him to Castel Gandolfo, where the Pope had the encounter of the fair kind. Castel Gandolfo is slightly out of Rome and is the astronomical center of the Jesuits, connected with Mount Graham in Arizona.
Wow. So soon after, the Second Vatican Council, which is commonly called the Vatican II.
Actually, soon after he, in his mind, put together this council, after that experience he had previously,
Right.
Then, before starting the council, he meets with the alien. And so, of course, the council becomes a way to say, okay, we need to reform this whole thing, embrace all the other religions and create a one-world religion in time for disclosure, otherwise, and we have to hurry up.
Right. Wow. Okay. But it did make the church more accessible and more open to the modern world in a way. But was there an agenda?
I would say that the church at that point, though, compromised with their own theology.
Yeah.
They did it because in the 50s, there was the opportunity given by Teilhard de Chardin, who had created this model whereby the original sin is implicit in the foundation of the universe. And so we had to baptize everybody, even the extraterrestrials. So that makes the church still relevant, still on top of this
one world. Well, yeah, you need that.
One world government.
Can't have the aliens getting here and laughing at us when we say, have you not been baptized?
But you can't have, you see, on the contrary of all the other religious denominations, who, of course, rightly so, are discussing the demonic nature of these beings, because there is some of them who are demonic in nature, and some of them are even fallen angels. The Catholic Church embraces everything. They don't care. Right. They care about their survival and they care about
their relevance in post-disclosure. Right.
Post-disclosure. And that's why they're preparing very methodically this post-disclosure in a way that, the evangelics are there like, oh, what should we do?
Right.
Call the Vatican.
Right, call the Vatican. Yeah. So if you had to pick one, the Vatican II reforms were they about modernization, damage control, or just preparing people for disclosure, or simply their own survival afterwards?
No, well, it's about preparing people for preparing the religious transformation that will then lead to disclosure. Because if you had a fractured pre-conciliary world in which the Vatican was their own thing, the Pope was the head of the church and didn't want to hear from any other religious denomination because they were the head and only representative of Jesus and God on earth.
Right.
And then you will have distance the Orthodox, distance the Evangelics, distance the Buddhists, distance the Jews, Instead, the plan is to put them all together in front of disclosure. Because their idea is that when the disclosure happens, and this is a little bit ventilated in Spielberg's movie. Huh? The people, rather than going to the rather than going to the political leaders, will go to the religious leaders.
Right.
So we have Dr. Peter Scafish, who is this guy who co-founded this Soul Foundation with people like Gary Nolan, the other scientists. That they are preparing with this organization,
right?
Like, it's a prominent UAP think tank at this point. It's the Soul Foundation Advisory Board has high-level intelligence and defense personnel working with them. They have Christopher Mellon, who is the co-founder and director of the Soul Foundation, who is be the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. You have Charles McCullough III, who used to be Inspector General in the Intelligence Community. You have David Grusch. You have Colonel Carl Neal. And if you notice, when the other day they went on the stairs of Capitol Hill and there was David Grusch in front, taking a prominent role, then you have Paulina Luna and all the various Bush. Peter Scafish doesn't really talk. He stays behind. And if you really ask, was Peter Scafish there? The AI initially is going to tell you no. Once you actually show them the pic that he was there, the AI will admit that he was there.
Wow. That's wild. So much going on.
There's much. I mean, the gathering of this, because if you go on the Soul Foundation website, they're preparing for post-UAP. They're not preparing for UAP discovery.
Right.
So it's
So they're
about
worried about control and the
control,
narrative.
designing frameworks and advising governments and civil institutions
Hmm.
to handle the public disclosure responsibly. I mean, what gives them this? Of course,
It's
if you ask the AI or ask a journalist, is the Soul Foundation related to the CIA or are they working for the government? They will tell you, no, they are an
no,
independent
yeah,
organization. But why does an independent organization go and advise governments and civil
right,
institutions if it's not the CIA?
right. Give me a break.
Give
I
me a
mean,
break.
it's
Absolutely.
common sense.
So you see, founded in 2022, the leadership also Gary Nolan. Gary Nolan is another important guy in this all
Isn't
because,
he an astrobiologist?
well, he's the guy who has done a very extensive study both on cancer but also on the orbs and UAPs.
Yeah.
He's somebody who, with the social cultural anthropology, so he defines himself, Dr. Peter Scaffish, has created this initiative.
Wow.
Now, but the thing about Gary Nolan is that in a recent interview, he has even admitted, sorry, it's TS, it's top secret, I can't tell you more.
Right.
I mean, they can tell you up to a certain extent, but
Right.
then they
And
can't
that's
tell
it.
you more. Instead, in my book, I tell you more. So
So
I
yeah, my
feel
book.
that it's
So-
rather unique.
So that's this whole aliens versus demons debate.
Yeah.
So it's coming into a crescendo right now, obviously,
Yeah,
but it goes back further than Christianity,
No, I
and
know.
you know,
If we have to be honest, the debate on the sexuality of angels and the fact that the fallen angels could or could have not copulated with the women of Earth
Right.
goes back 2,000 years. I mean, we are talking about
right. It
very
goes
early
back. I
people.
mean, does it go back to Egypt and Samaria?
No, but it goes even to the early Christian discussions that they were having with Origins, the fathers of the church. They were always debating the validity. Also, the book of Enoch, for example, was then
Right.
relegated to the side, but it's still cited in the book of Jude. So you have the relevance of the book of Jude, though, that implies that there is a truth to what the book of Enoch is saying. And then you have, of course, the people who eventually will have the access to the book of Enoch. I'm not saying book of Enoch is Enoch 1, not Enoch 2 or 3, which are post-Christianity.
Right.
But Enoch 1 is a very relevant subject, and that's why it's been always casted aside.
What do you think ancient Egypt and Samaria understood about these beings that the Vatican really couldn't afford to reveal?
Well, I mean, that is really where Zecharia Sitchin comes into the equation, no? Because Sitchin was the guy who, this unorthodox kind of Sumerian expert, and his secret collaboration with the Vatican is also the matter of one of my chapters. With evidence, though, with photos and everything. It's not like I open my mouth and I say, this, because when I originally, 20 years ago, did this interview on Project Camelot, and I stated that, Sitchin collaborates with the Vatican, and they were like puzzled by this whole thing.
Right.
I brought the testimony in front of the cameras of Genesis 6 Productions in Rome of Gianmario Ferramonti, who said, I was bringing the actual alien artifacts from the Vatican to Zecharia Sitchin and vice versa to Corrado Balducci.
Wow.
For study. And that is because, of course, we are talking about Zecharia Sitchin. We are talking about somebody who had, who was well versed in what the whole Anunnaki thing, then relates on what we have also, of course, in Genesis 6 and in the book of Enoch.
Right. So, but it seems clear that the Vatican inherited a much older understanding of these beings and obviously still has them. And the danger was that those older traditions didn't describe some of these beings as being benevolent at all, right? I mean,
For example, there is in fact one way the Vatican, I explain, actually I give a link in my book. You can access to a booklet that was previously censored by the Vatican. Then they eventually publish it on their own observatory website.
Wow.
But I give the link to it, which is very difficult to find. And it came out, this book, initially was Tom Horn and Chris Putham with their Exo Vaticano, who were given a copy apparently by Guy Consolmagno, who then later on will go on and write a book about baptizing extraterrestrial. So he was very much into this, alien saviors of mankind kind of idea.
Right.
Well, In all his books, though, Guy Consolmagno, who until last year was the director of the Specula Vaticana, the Vatican Observatory, and now is the director of the Vatican Observatory Foundation, Guy Consolmagno never once mentions the Book of Enoch. And there is a reason, because once you mention the Book of Enoch, then those beings that are still could be perceived as benevolent in Genesis 6 become automatically malevolent. And at that point, it will be a problem for the Vatican.
I see.
Really have that kind of, open embracing all of extraterrestrials, because the problem is not that we shouldn't embrace extraterrestrials if they are benevolent.
Right.
However, the problem is having a discernment about what are these beings. Are they extraterrestrials? Are they extraterrestrials and interdimensional? Are they extra-dimensional? What is their intention towards mankind? Are they a superior race and they're going to treat us like simply primitives from a plantation field?
Right. And all the nuance that they would rather not deal with just now,
So they tend to, ignore the Book of Enoch in the Vatican. But we know that the Book of Enoch was present in the Vatican archives.
Right.
However, we also know that the copy that eventually made it out in the open and that everybody cites was not thanks. I mean, the Vatican, helped in a way.
Right.
Once, when they want to research a subject, they are definitely helpful because they're also in
very powerful, very resourceful. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the Georgetown University is a Jesuit university. I mean,
Right.
you're talking about the most powerful universities and most influential universities in the world. So, of course, they will have, let's say, a academic function.
Absolutely.
But regarding the Book of Enoch, I would like to just focus a little bit.
Sure. Because then I want to circle around to Aleister Crowley. So that's a good. We'll go from there. But you go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So the Book of Enoch, Enoch 1, consists of 5 books. 5. Let's say you have the Book of the Watchers, which is chapters 1 to 36. Then you have the Book of Parables of Enoch, chapters 37 to 71. Then you have the astronomical book, also relevant, chapters 72 to 82. And then you have the Book of Dreams, Visions, like the more prophetic, the flood, the history of chapters 83 to 90. And then you have the Epistle of Enoch. Now, let's go through a little bit these various elements of this book. Now, in the Book of the Watchers, this is particularly interesting for us because it actually details the actual fall of angels who allegedly mated with human women. Now, creating the infamous evil hybrid giants known as Nephilim. Now, that is something that certain people accept, certain theologians accept as a physical unit. But to this day, like we said earlier, there is people who are discussing the sexuality of angels. Now, I know the sexuality of angels is the most absurd thing that a human could ever discuss. And since I was a kid, I laughed about it because every time this thing surfaced on a movie, on a discussion in church, I was like, what the heck is wrong with people? But apparently it has a meaning, a relevance, because once you accept they have a sexuality and they're capable of mating with the women on earth, you imply they have a descendants. Now, certain Orthodox say that is not possible because it will be like when you make a donkey go with a horse and the result is a mule which doesn't give any descendants.
No offspring, right.
No offspring. So then, it becomes kind of a theological discussion. You have all these theologians who stand up there with their long beards, trying to, with their assurance that they are the ones who know the truth and you know nothing. So, I mean, you're always planting this kind of discussion. So, in reality, you have, for example, recently even, a difference in the Orthodox posture. You had the guy, Stephen DeYoung, going to Tucker Carlson, and he had a idea whereby, yes, you had the giants, they were actually physical, but then their offspring that was created by the Nephilim was actually a ritual product. Like you have to ritually copulate, and then through the spirit of the Nephilim, you will produce a being that, not a DNA offspring. Okay?
Right.
So that is a slight difference.
More of a fifth dimensional manifestation, like something
and you create something that is
that comes from spirit almost.
Yeah, but it depends still from the demonic side. While instead you have those in the evangelical side, yes, there is a DNA, and then there has been actually the CIA involved in a research, and the
Did you hear about that?
Of course. But
it doesn't surprise me at all.
Well, of course, yes. But let's also see the sources for that.
Right.
Was Gerani, which is sometimes questionable, but then you have Lynn Buchanan, who was one of the remote viewers of Project Stargate. So, I mean, it's still interesting. But then going into the Book of Parables, as you have Book of Parables, it's three parables, basically, that illustrate who the wicked and the evils are in this story, and who the righteous, the righteous and the good and the bad,
right?
And the ugly. I don't know, maybe.
Right.
So these giants were not so good looking in the end,
right?
And then you have the Messiah figure, which takes center stage, which will ultimately play the role of the judge in the end times. Okay, so you have a prophetic element of the Book of Enoch in line with what then we will have in the New Testament,
right,
of Revelation and so on. Then you have the astronomical book. Now, when it comes to astronomy, we always know that in the ancient, for the ancients, astronomy meant astronomy and astrology together. It wasn't,
right, it was science, yeah.
It was together, though. It was like alchemy, Alchemy was chemistry, but also spirituality together. And now it's
exactly, yeah.
So the details, Enoch's knowledge of celestial bodies in what is considered, I would say, an ancient ethno-astronomical and cosmological text of relevance, definitely. And this is important to, map out where Enoch's knowledge is like manifesting, And then you have the Book of Dream Visions. And this is really those visions of the flood that go back to, and then the flood can, of course, be brought back to the Sumerian times. Go to Gilgamesh, we can go to the whole
the Younger Dryas.
Yeah. So
12,500 years ago.
Yes, so it connects absolutely. And then you have, of course, the history of Israel. Now, the Book of Enoch has not been really accepted, but it's still accepted in Ethiopia and in Eritrea. I mean, by those, even within the Jewish community over there, which has always been a little bit, connected to the Queen of Sheba, and when she was together with Solomon, all that stuff. And then you have these Orthodox churches, which are minoritarian. So the Book of Enoch never became accepted canonically.
No, not in any mainstream way.
It was isolated. And that's why I state in my book, when I cited one Enoch, I cited italics. Italic in cursive. I don't cite it like the accepted canonical texts, which are straight, you don't italicize but you italicize something that is not recognized.
Right.
You have the Ethiopian Orthodox Tehedo and the Eritrean Orthodox Tehedo Church, as well as the Ethiopian Jewish community known as the Beta Israel, which accept it.
Wow. Yeah.
And this is relevant, though, because they were rather untouched. The Jews lived in Ethiopia for thousands of years.
Right.
So that Beta Israel community that was once prosperous, with a population that peaked in the 17th century, that some sources suggest was actually over 1 million.
Wow.
Now then the famine, the wars, and then the mass migration to Israel with Operation Moses and Solomon in the 1980s and 90s, now they are left very few of them.
Oh, yeah.
So this is really the reality of the relevance of the Book of Enoch, which then is relevant also in today's discourse when you have Paulina Luna talking about it on Joe Rogan show, or also the relevance within the interdimensional hypothesis and the extra-dimensional hypothesis.
Right.
So I think that then when it comes down to Alistair Crowley, you like talk about the fallen angels. Well, in my book, I also explain how the Vatican has always had access to grimoires and hidden texts for the evocation of the fallen angels.
So, the church was trying to keep this knowledge, but there was also these occult groups trying to reconnect with this knowledge, maybe even resurrect it, some might say. But this is where Crowley comes into the story, and a lot of people...
Crowley actually comes in my story because he's connected to Pope Roncalli that he apparently met once. There is a very incredible testimony in my book given by a guy actually I personally knew, which was Amado Crowley, the alleged son of Alistair Crowley.
What does he say?
You have to read in my book.
Okay, fair enough.
See, he basically said that between the two, there was actually some form of admiration.
Right. Okay.
We're talking about the Pope who then had the encounter of the third kind.
Right. So
he was also a Freemason, by the way. So
yeah, doesn't surprise me.
In Istanbul, let's not forget that Alistair Crowley will even call his own son Ataturk for his love of the Turkish Freemasonry.
Wow.
Ataturk is the guy who secularized Turkey and brings back Freemasonry linked to the United Lodge of England. So there is a connection there.
So I have a question for you. Was the American space program, I mean, not the public one, was the real American space program, was it, do you think it was secretly built to reopen a portal?
The American space program, you intend what? Parsons and the likes, who were of course associated with Crowley. What do you intend for the space program? Intend the actual Caltech? Because, for example, I give you an experience of mine. I mean, I was once at a UFO conference taking place around the corner here. It wasn't Content in the Desert. There was some other event with Graham Hancock. I don't know. Just around the corner from where I live. I think it's always in Palm Desert. And at one point, there was this guy who arrived from the Parsons Institute, what is now called, the modern Caltech representatives, basically. And they came to me out of nowhere. This guy came to me and said, "We are fans of your work. We follow your work." What? It's like, a little bit surprised. And then he even wanted to do a picture with me, a selfie. So it was like really, he was, I was kind of, puzzled by this whole thing. But he was, I checked out, he even gave me his card. I have it somewhere. It was a genuine guy. He wasn't like making it up. But, this whole thing was, for me, if you are connected to the Parsons Corporation, which is one of the 10 NASA centers, if you connected to the California Tech, to this, it's quite weird that they come to me and say, we actually follow, because I wrote, as you know, a book, Invisible Master, that touched on these topics earlier. Invisible Master is where I start touching on this topic. With this book is the fruit of also my experience and research here in America, where I finally could understand who is behind all this disclosure and what is. So it gives you that ulterior layer. I mean, I touch on certain things, like especially from my own private experiences in the occult, in certain secret societies and stuff, and the fact that they evoke this, like you said, interdimensional and want to open a portal. Now, in regards to that, a very interesting element in our story is that Dr. Kian Hussein, have you ever heard of him? Well,
say his name again?
Dr. Kian Hussein. This guy is the father of the Chinese space program. Now, you know that he was actually here working with Parsons and the other before he became the father of the Chinese space program, and that he is the father also of the remote viewing program in China?
I think that's where if I That's maybe where I've read his name, because I have read
Yeah,
about the
because
remote viewing book.
Jan Xusen and Jack Parson, in the late 1930s, they were both key members of the experimental rocketry group at Caltech. That was known as the Suicidal Squad, the
Wow.
Suicide Squad, actually.
That was the
Because
original
when they
suicide. Yeah.
went, that's how it's called, that TV series they made for a couple of.
Yeah, they made a movie too. Yeah.
No, that one, Angels. I don't remember. There was a series based on Parsons and his OTO activities and stuff. Well, one thing is that they always, of course, make these dangerous experiments nearby here in the Mojave Desert, blowing things up.
Yeah.
And that's why they were called the Suicide Squad, because you never know if they will blow up themselves in the end. So in 1937, Kuhn joined Parsons. But Parsons, as you know, was then connected not only to Aleister Crowley, he was connected also to the Communist Party of Pasadena.
Oh.
They were, beyond the rocketry. Both men were briefly associated with what was known as the Professional Unit 122, which was a communist that then led to, if you remember, led to the excuse that Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, had when they accused him of being involved with the OTA. He said, no, I was there investigating on behalf of the naval intelligence. So,
Wow. So, because I know that Crowley used to run with what's his name from Scientology?
Hubbard.
Hubbard.
Yeah, Ron Hubbard. He was the founder, and he was a member of the Lodge of Jack Parsons.
Yes. Yeah. That's
So they're all connected.
Crazy connection.
Think about it, because in my book here, I explain there is a UAP reverse engineering program in America, in Russia, and in China. And there is also a remote program in America, and there are of course. And then you have it in Russia with the Lieutenant Colonel Savin, and then you have it in China. And then in China you have, of course, thanks to the Jesuits, their passion for astronomy. Nowadays, the space program is one of the most advanced programs. I mean, they send. They are probably the ones who are going to conquer the moon before us, because here we are still with a situation whereby we are employing those idiots at Blue Origin to blow up a whole pad, and now they don't even know how to go to the moon.
I know, yeah.
And probably did it on purpose to favor the Chinese. They continue going there and building up their space.
They got to be laughing their asses off at America right now with what
they are on the space station cooking their Chinese stuff and to make Chinese food on a spaceship, while we are still trying to discuss how we're going to do it.
Exactly.
So the concept of my book is that the Vatican is the leading figure.
I see.
They are the ones who actually Father Coyne, who used to be director of the Vatican Observatory. I think he helped NASA mapping Mars, if I don't get it wrong.
Right.
So, we're talking about, it's not like NASA is helping the Jesuits, it's vice versa, the Jesuit astronomers leading NASA.
People don't realize that.
Yeah, and that is something that I wanted to make people realize. I wanted to show who were these figures. I wanted to show that when the Pope, over 10 years ago, the first Jesuit Pope talked about, baptizing or, embracing there was a whole story behind it that went even far back.
Right.
It was, they traced it to, Guy Consolmagno wrote a book. Guy Consolmagno said for the first time that he will have baptized an extraterrestrial in 2010. That's BS. His mentor, 20 or 30 years before Father Coyne, had already...
He already said that.
No, well, there was an article on the New York Times called Will You Baptize an Extraterrestrial, which is the same title as the book after. So, the history... Father Coyne was the one connected to then Daniel Sheehan, who nowadays is the lawyer of Luis Elizondo.
I know Danny well,
and all these people.
Right.
Daniel Sheehan is a Jesuit.
I know he is. Yeah, he is. Yeah. Very proud. I think he's doing. I think he's got a good heart. And I like Danny.
I don't think he has a good heart. He's a shield, though, because he, like I said at the beginning of that interview, I don't necessarily think that these gatekeepers have a bad heart. Some of them they're not all ill intention. Some of them good intention. However, when you are covering up this kind of situation, how good can you be?
Right.
I know that Daniel might be your friend, but
No, well, I mean, and Danny is supposed to be trying to uncover. So,
well,
but
that is the thing also, that you have these figures that propose themselves as the ones who are uncovering, because they're gatekeepers, so they have to like David Grusch, who says, oh, well, maybe they will hit me with the direct energy weapon.
energy weapon,
Or
yeah.
then you have Jeremy Corbyn, I am a martyr to the cause, they will kill
Oh,
me.
yeah, Corbyn. He's so obviously a show, yeah.
They are unfortunately manipulated, though. I mean, I
Yeah.
wanted to make it clear in my book, we are watching you. We know who
Right.
you are. We know the narrative. We know where you're taking this narrative from, and we want the truth.
Right.
actually
We
not-
deserve to know the truth.
Yeah, without this filter.
Yeah, no kidding. Without the bullshit, without the narrative, without you all have to have everything in place to have control at the end of it. No, we are human beings and we have a right to know what you know, and you have no right to hide it. That's the truth, and that's why your book is important.
Yeah, the thing is that there has always been a very manipulative, almost Machiavellian way of acting from the Jesuits. Like when we talked about Father George Coyne, who is behind also the construction of that Vatican observatory on Mount Graham, which then led to the construction of Lucifer, and then became Lucy and Lucy I, Lucy II. Now, he was noted for creating I said before Mars. No, he was actually, I think his primary research was lunar surface, the whole economy of when they actually, NASA went on the moon, it was Father Coyne who did the map for them. Then he did the map also for Mercury. And he also did some research, of course, on Mars regarding the mapping of the planet Mars. But we're talking about very advanced. I mean, when Coyne was here in America, and I show this in my book, and I actually give links also to videos that are very rare to find in special sites, you can find them. Father Coyne was like, at the time, we didn't have the World Wide Web. So the World Wide Web, you could compartmentalize truth. You could actually come to America and give one truth, go back to Europe and give another truth. Now, people go back to Italy and say, no, the aliens, it's not, we don't discuss them. It's not the UFO. No, we are not interested in this guy. Then he will come here and say, yes, I'm a believer. And, and he will start. So this gives you the idea of how they were like ambivalent in their...
and he didn't have to worry about, word getting out or somebody saying, hey, they was just here. And
No, because there was no connection. He would give a speech in San Diego where he would be talking about, embracing maybe, this reality, the etc. And then he will go back to Italy, in front of a scientific and why not in Italy? Because in Italy, the Catholic Church wanted to keep the flock, without any speculations of anything that could upset them. So there was, like I explained in my book, a discussion that started within the Jesuits and other religious orders in the early 50s. There was a guy called Domenico Grasso because the discussion was all about, should we baptize them or should we not baptize them? Imagine that. I mean, that is the whole thing. But it became a very, I know it might seem ridiculous, but...
I know, but how do you... I'm just thinking of the communication that has to happen, be like, can you do this? But why? Well, because we have this thing called original sin, and listen, you don't have to believe in it, but just will you do it for us so that you know what I mean? Like,
in front of the camera,
okay. It's just kind of, you got to laugh at the way they do things.
But the thing is that the whole relevance apparently goes back to the very idea of the very first fathers of the church, because going back to the book of Enoch and the fallen angels, there was two different takes on the demons that unfortunately are so prevalent on this dimension and planet Earth. Now, these demons, some of the fathers of the church were focusing on the fact that they were the fallen angels, but some of them didn't imply that. They were a separate thing. And they could also, the idea of daimones, of daemon from the ancient Greeks, they were also implying the possibility that maybe you could save these demons, because it was their own choice to embrace evil, but they could also embrace good. I mean, I know it sounds so far-fetched, but it is actually at the very basis of the original Christian discussion and debate. When they were going to the Council of Nicaea, they were going with this kind of debates.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, because I mean, I think about it, when they think a person is possessed, they don't go in and just, they try to get the person clean, through the rite of exorcism. So it makes sense they would have this conversation, because why would you immediately imagine that maybe this is not something that is permanent,
Well, I mean, the relationship between the fallen angels and demons is heavily debated. So, I mean, you have, those ones who say, okay, the demons are simply those fallen angels.
Blanket statement, yeah.
And then there is, though, a different take. But there is a different take, actually, even in Islam, if you think about it. Because in Islam, when you talk about the genies, you don't imply that they are all demonic. There is the ifrit. There is the genies that are demonic, and they are actually the ones that embrace the Quran. So, it's very particular, this whole, and then you have, for example, in Judaism, they don't think it's the fallen angels that possess a human being. They actually think it's the spirit of the dead who affect the human being. Yes. So, I mean, you have very different takes on this matter.
Wide variety, yeah.
When a spiritual being, when we are talking about Lucifer, of course, can be. Then there is the Gnostic approach,
right?
Prometheus approach to Lucifer.
They believe he was the favorite, and I mean, there's a lot.
Yeah, of course. But then they also those who believe that we needed that in order to arrive to our current state.
Right. Exactly. It's wild, the mythology.
So I didn't, in my book, I didn't want to side with one or the other faction.
Right.
I wanted to simply give you the facts. Then I can tell you, yes, I have my own experience. Yes, I can deem certain. I can actually ask for discernment and ask for people to be very careful about opening certain doors with the occult, because then you don't know where you're going to end up.
Exactly. You got to be. So, but I think it's clear that all these entities cannot be categorized as good or evil, or angels or demons, or benevolent or malevolent, right? What in your research, what are the signs that a being is benevolent?
I would say this, that, like I state in my book, the universe, and this is stated by me, but is also stated by my mentor in this field, which, like I said, is Roberto Pinotti. The universe reflects the good and the bad. So, then you have different races, and that they might, reflect the good or the bad, or they might reflect both, like us. We are out of the choice of, we have our will, that God gives you free will to choose. You can go into the abyss of hell, you can go, and it depends where you want to stand in this creation.
Right.
So to actually, the motivations that these beings might have, if they are destructive, if they're seeking physical bodies to possess or torment.
Right.
I mean, what kind of beings are these?
Right. Obviously, those are not well-intentioned.
They're not well-intentioned. and it's weird to see that, for example, in the abductees account, the greys are almost always described as negative, while instead you have Steven Spielberg, who is actually portraying them like a fairy tale in E.T. So it kind of like it gives you a little something to think about. In regards to this highly debated question, some will equate directly the demonic and the demons with fallen angels, but many traditions identify demons as disembodied earthbound spirit of the Nephilim. So here we have the offspring of fallen angels and human women, not only the fallen angels thing, which is another matter. So we go back to the sexuality of the angels. It becomes a really pretty good discussion. When you are discussing that kind of thing. But in the end, I think that for us, relevant for us today is to understand that what is being presented to us every day as the disclosure narrative everybody that says I'm a disclosure advocate, I am a whistleblower, can we trust them? Absolutely not. And that's why I
Right.
made this book. That was my main intention. It wasn't about, digging deep in the
Right.
land of the
Make
theology.
everyone realize that this is all a dog and pony show. What they're showing you.
I mean, I can discuss it. I can make you knowledge. I
Right.
can knowledge these things, but I can't start discussing them in deep. Like Saint Augustine or like.
Right.
I mean, I can't go into like Thomas Aquinas and write the Summa Theologica about it because it's not my intention. I mean, maybe in the future I might do
Right.
that.
Right. But this book is timely.
This
and
book
people,
is timely, and people needed to realize
Right.
that the disclosure is happening, but behind the disclosure, there is a narrative that wants us to follow them. Follow them and continue to follow those terrestrial institutions, which I
That's
think
right.
have not really made humanity a better place up until now.
No, I agree. If you're referring to the earthly institutions, I think that is absolutely safe to
So
say.
why should we trust the government? Why should we trust the church?
The last people we should trust. They have done everything under the sun to earn our distrust. So now we're supposed to turn around and are you crazy? I'm not crazy. I think some people maybe are still a little crazy to imagine that. But
then we have the link with psionics, we have the link with the paranormal, we have the link with
I know. Yeah.
And that is important because it also makes us understand that we as a species, and I explained that in this book, that's where I agree, maybe in a rare case where I agree with Uri Geller. There is a lot to do also with us and our human potential. That,
right. I agree with that too.
We are kind of presented all this while we are also being dumbed down every day. While we are being dumbed down by an excessive use of the AI for the young people in universities who are no longer able to write a thesis without ChatGPT or even a paragraph of anything because they are no longer capable.
They can't even write with their hands anymore.
But let's go back into what I wrote. It's all about reverse engineering, and Trojan horse of reverse engineering produces the AI that dumb us down. So it's obvious that whatever beings are giving us this technology, they want us in an idiocracy state of mind. To conquer us, to dominate us, and to eventually relegate to the usual institutions,
right?
The one behind, but many others like the White House or Kremlin or any other, These are institutions that are controlling and that are continuing to control. But why are they now so obsessed in reaching a control that not even George Orwell in 1984 would have envisioned? It's because they are about to tell us, in 10 years from now, when we are all in the grid, they will tell us, yes, there is 4, 5, 10, 20, whatever races there. Yeah, we're here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah, they were here. We made a deal. Well, we didn't make a deal. Yeah, this previous administration made a bad deal. They were bad. All the problems are from this administration. They do that now. Why wouldn't they do it then?
They throw it into but, when you think about the fact that these topics were discussed in 1935 in the White House, they were not discussed now. I mean, a long time before even Roswell came together, or the idea of Majestic 12 that came after that. I mean, if Majestic 12 is a reality, it's a reality that was built out of a compromise.
Exactly.
But everything that was built out of this Faustinian bargain, and you are out with Faust, but Faustinian bargain means.
I know exactly what that is. Yeah.
And so this bargain has been made with these beings. And the result is that we become their forever slaves.
Right. Just the way we're lining up to be. If we don't wake up and start unifying, uniting, and realizing that we have all the power. We, the people, have all the power. If we would just stop letting them divide us and distract us and take our money and do whatever they want.
I decided with this new book that I will leave for.
Your timing is great.
But I will also leave behind all my interest for terrestrial politics. No longer is relevant.
Yes.
After, I came to the final conclusion that we have to detach from terrestrial politics because it's no longer relevant and they are a bunch of puppets. I don't want to deal with puppets.
Man. Amen to that. I hope everyone heard that. Say it again, Leo. Say it again. So
I
everyone,
mean, we are talking about puppets. I can put it in there.
they're all of them, all of them.
The puppet here could be even an alien, but usually we are the puppets of these
Right.
things. We have to come to the conclusion that for us, in order to keep our own humanity alive,
Right.
we can no longer accept these compromises.
No.
And we can no longer accept that these people on top are giving us only fragments of the truth rather than the whole truth.
That's perfect. And I want to end on that note, but I want to ask you real quick before I let you go.
Yeah.
Did you see the picture of Trump with the two Nordic looking?
Yeah, no, but so Trump has posted the picture of a growling pains and Nordic. I mean, rolling and actually in this way, operating a psyop upon a psyop, which is really questionable. Because when you are suddenly posting on your website dedicated to this topic that the illegal aliens are actually the aliens they talk. I mean, come on, man! It becomes a farce. And when you are mentioning, I remember once he was in his presidential plane, and suddenly somebody asked the subject of the aliens, and then you have, his spokesperson, that idiot of Caroline Levitt, who says,
right, yeah. Just like they did with Epstein when they asked him about Epstein.
Yeah,
they all start laughing. As if it's a big.
Let's laugh it off.
Mockery.
Let's laugh it off. No,
right.
But in reality, Epstein and all the people of the Epstein elite are the ones who are taking advantage of this reverse engineering.
Absolutely.
And
they are the 100%.
And they are the ones who are actually conducting themselves in that despicable manner, because these beings in the when you are relating to them in that way, you are also giving them, feeding them all this terrible energy from
that's what they thrive off of.
From your raping, from
that's what I mean. There's a direct correlation.
It's a little bit like when Jacob Frank, who was of course the guy who created the Frankists, so the Sabbatean Frankists of Jacob Frank, believed in an interdimensional reality. And in fact, who was leading for them this interdimensional reality was Baba.
Oh, Baba.
You remember when there was that email blowing Booba Baba, how you call it, Baba?
Oh, the one email that went around from the files, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, that is the name.
And everyone just thought they were just talking in code. Yeah.
Yeah, but that is actually a name that is used by the Sabbatean Frankists for talking about the interdimensional Big Brother.
Wow. Oh, shit. I didn't know that either. My God. Everyone, you got to read Leo's book. It's the time is now. I just got a copy. I would have read it normally, but we did this interview quick because the timing is.
I want you to promise me with another interview once you read the book. So then
I give you my word. Absolutely.
Okay. Take care, my friend.
You too, my friend. So Leo has a YouTube channel. We're gonna put this video out together, and we're gonna, so you can catch us there. And
always.
For everyone listening on Spotify and YouTube, don't forget to drop a review if you enjoyed this podcast. YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to both me and Leo's channels, and drop a comment on the video. Please share it if you will. And Leo, thanks again, brother. You're the man. I love your work. Keep it up, man. This timing on this book is amazing.
Thank you so much, and I will try to get the next book also with another perfect.
Okay.